Welcome to Book Banter with me, your host, Dianne Burckhardt. I hope you will join me every Wednesday as we explore all things to do with, well, books. Let's get on with our show today. Hello, my happy people. Today is September 17th, 2025, and I have been looking forward to this episode all summer. Whenever I got the application for this author to be on my podcast, I immediately knew exactly where I was going to put them in the lineup because, in case you don't know this Friday is my birthday. So, as a birthday present to myself, I booked this author for today. In case you haven't figured it out by now, I am a huge sci-fi fan. I love science fiction books. And today's guest is somebody so special because not only are they an actual microbiologist who has done work studying microbes in Antarctica, but they are also an award-winning sci-fi author who takes all of their vast wealth of knowledge from their main career and puts it all into their fantastic books and creates worlds that are just unimaginable for most of us, but very imaginable for them. You're going to love it. If you're a fan of sci-fi, you may have just found your new favorite author. Please welcome to Book Banter with Dianne Burckhardt, Joan Slonczewski. If you've listened to any of my shows before, you know that I always like to start out by having our guests tell everyone who you are and what you do.
I'm Joan Slonczewski, although my students call me Dr. S. I've taught microbiology at Kenyon for a number of years. My students study bacteria that can grow in the gut and influence your brain. So we're interested in the brain-gut axis. And I've also written science fiction for 40 years. My book, A Door into Ocean, has been noted by some blog posts for its 40-year anniversary as a book about biology by a biologist, but it's a book about a planet covered entirely by ocean that's inhabited by genetic engineers who are all women, and they use nonviolence to repel an interstellar invasion. That book actually is just coming around again, kind of as a classic, but my most recent book is Minds in Transit. And Minds in Transit is rather different. Minds in Transit is about a megalopolis where there are all kinds of people and aliens and microbial intelligence.
One of the reasons that I was really excited about having this conversation with you today was your research on the gut-brain connection. Because as somebody whose brain does not like to work very well, I have been experimenting for decades with my diet to see how it affects my ability to think better, speak better, just to function better with all of my neurological conditions.
That's interesting. And actually, there's a long ancient tradition of connecting the gut with the brain. You know, the old saying that I have a feeling in my gut about something.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out to be actually true that we now consider the community of microbes in the gut to be a part of the body, an organ of the body. In fact, an organ directly connected to the brain. So there is a tremendous amount of research, and I was involved in some of the early hints at this research 30 years ago. A colleague and I were studying how your E. coli bacteria, one of the people hear about that grow in your gut.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we noticed that E. coli bacteria are affected by acid stress. If you put the bacteria in acid, then they do a chemical reaction that produces GABA, which happens to be a neurotransmitter. But the funny thing is, they produce it just by converting food into a waste product. So for your gut bacteria, this neurotransmitter is just a waste product that they get rid of. But we were thinking about, we thought, well, isn't that odd that your gut bacteria make neurotransmitter as a waste product? So since then, we've discovered that gut bacteria make about 50 different neurotransmitters. In fact, you can discover new neurotransmitters by looking at all the waste products that bacteria make in your gut and saying, hey, this is a bacterial waste product. Maybe it's a neurotransmitter. And then you discover a new neurotransmitter.
Wow, that is incredible.
So there are tryptophan metabolites, DOPA, L-DOPA, which is needed for Parkinsonism. So Since then, there are about a dozen different brain conditions where a gut link has been established. The one that's strongest is Parkinsonism. It's now understood that years before people have Parkinsonism, they experience constipation and other gut disorders, and that there are problems with their gut microbiome. And there's a direct link because the gut microbiome makes dopa, and dopa is needed in Parkinsonism. Also, they've looked at autism. So, a subset of autistic children also have gut problems. And if you feed them certain probiotics, then both their gut systems and their autism systems improve. This is a growing area. And not just the brain, but also the whole immune system and cancer are influenced by the gut microbiome. So there are a number of clinical trials going on. Just about every major university has a clinical trial going on for fecal bacteriotherapy
Mm-hmm.
to treat something, whether it's a brain condition or immune or cancer.
That is just fascinating.
My favorite one is there was one elderly woman who was treated with a cancer drug, and they didn't expect it to work, but she got cured. It was like a miracle cure. And so they thought, well, maybe there's something in her gut bacteria. So they took her fecal gut bacteria and gave it to other people having the same clinical trial drug. And sure enough, there were miracle cures in that group. So now they're wondering, well, we have to give this woman's feces to every patient that has cancer. We don't have enough of her feces to do that. And so this has led to yet another discovery in gut bacteria.
God, that is just amazing.
So, in my science fiction, my last two books have really featured microbial aliens in the brain that consciously act as partners, regulating the brain and keeping the person healthy, and also amplifying their brain's capacity. If you can imagine, if your brain had a million collaborators in it, what you could do, right? And another source of inspiration for this in Minds in Transit was I was familiar with the work of Michelangelo. I'm a big art fan and a
Mm-hmm.
fan of classical art. And I read about the history of how Michelangelo actually created all the statues and paintings. And actually, he had an entire workshop of sculptors and carvers and workmen who participated. It wasn't just him. So I thought, well, imagine if an artist had a brain full of microbial helpers, like a microbial art studio. How creative would that be?
One of the questions that I was going to ask you was, how does your scientific work influence your science fiction work? And I think you just pretty much answered that.
I think that's right. I would say that in the research in microbiology that I do, it's microbiology and biochemistry. And the things we find out are just amazing. And my students really also take the bulk of the credit because I run a research lab. For many years, I've run a research lab funded by the National Science Foundation, where I hire first year students as soon as they get to Kenya, and I put them in the lab because they have no prejudices about what to expect. And they wash dishes, they look at the data and point out things that the seniors didn't notice. And then we discover things like we discovered that certain food molecules are capable of helping fight drug resistance and preventing drug resistance in bacteria. And so we studied that and published papers together on it. So we're always finding out new things. And I now write the textbook, the leading textbook by Norton on microbiology. And I have to say that microbiology is one field where writing the textbook is more amazing than writing science fiction because the real things that we discover about microbes, you just couldn't make up in a book.
That is a good question, though. With all of the success that you had in your scientific field and all of the scholarly things that you have published, what made you decide to do a science fiction book?
When I was in college, I read the books of Ursula Le Guin.
Hmm.
And before that, for years, I read Isaac Asimov, I read Robert Heinlein. I loved science fiction. One of my earliest memories is knowing that I would be a scientist because my father was a Nobel nominated physicist. He basically wrote the encyclopedia article on magnetism, and he invented lots of things that are in your cell phone. So I always knew I would be a scientist, but I found living things more fascinating even than silicon circuits and especially molecular biology. So the things that I was seeing in the laboratory were just so amazing. And I thought, well, other people read science fiction, but why doesn't science fiction show the things that I know about in the laboratory? At the same time, when I was in college, I encountered interesting social experiments, I would say, in particular, the Quakers and the practice of Quakerism. And that was at the height of the Vietnam War and the nuclear arms race. And I thought, why don't more people know about this? So it was in combination, the molecular biology that I knew and the social philosophies and practice of the Quakers. I thought, I bet I can combine these two things and write books that other people would find out things about. I had things I felt passionate about, such as the planet surviving instead of blowing up in a nuclear war. I really
Hmm.
felt strongly about that. And so I had strong feelings about that I couldn't write about in a research article. Although when I was at Yale for my PhD, one time there was a department retreat on all our research. So without getting permission, I hosted a session of that retreat about saving the world from the nuclear arms race. Okay, so
Nice.
so I tried doing that even in grad school, but by writing science fiction, I was able to get my ideas out in ways that would not have reached people through the research journals. So my book, A Door into Ocean, invented a planet where the people were all female and they lived on floating islands. And they were also genetic engineers. So I could use invented genetic engineering. And they were pacifists like the Quakers. They used nonviolent revolution to fight space invaders. And the other thing about those women was, how did they swim underwater? Well, they could swim farther underwater because they had oxygen storing microbes in their skin. And that idea came from the laboratory where I was working with purple bacteria that bleached white under light. And I thought, well, what if these purple bacteria stored oxygen and bleached white when they ran out of oxygen? And so I invented that. So the people have this purple skin and they bleach white underwater and they can swim half an hour underwater. So a lot of things that I knew from the science as well as from the social experimenting that I saw were brought together, and I put things together in neat ways that I guess other people didn't think of.
That is just so incredible. I love that whole idea. Now, you're only the second person to have ever won the John W. Campbell Award twice.
I think Fred Pohl also won it twice, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
I knew Fred Pohl quite well way back when, and we traded off books and so on, and I really appreciated that connection.
Are there any other milestones that you would like to achieve?
Right now, the milestone I would like to achieve is to get a spot on a panel at Worldcon, the World Science Fiction Convention in Seattle. I hadn't been to a Worldcon in a number of years because, I was going to science research conferences instead. So I went this year and I thought, oh, well, surely I'll get on a panel. I'm an author and all that. And no, I didn't get on a panel. I thought, well, this must be a really high honor to get on a panel at Worldcon. So that's my ambition for next year.
Well, now you should look at the Frankfurter Book Messe. It is the world's largest publishing convention that's held in Frankfurt, Germany.
Wow, yes, I have heard of the Frankfurt Book Fair. That's the same thing, right?
Yes.
Yes. You know where I remember hearing about the Frankfurt Book Fair is one of my favorite science fiction books of all time is Kurt Vonnegut's Galapagos.
Hmm.
And, Vonnegut was a big jokester. And that book is basically a joke on evolution about humans evolving into nonverbal fish. And what happens at the beginning of that book is that nearly all the humans on Earth get wiped out by a microbial disease. And it gets first spread by something that happens at the Frankfurt Book Fair. So that was like a throwaway joke in Vonnegut's book. And so ever since then, I thought, oh, yes, I know that must be a famous book fair. I'd like to go there. So, yes, I will try to do that next year.
Are all of your books part of the Elysium cycle?
So, the Elysium cycle or the Elysium universe, I would say that most of my books are set in the Elysium universe at different times. Like sometimes I'll move ahead 1,000 years and show more advanced technology. I do have a couple of books set on either on Earth or close to Earth. Like The Highest Frontier is actually set at a college in orbit above Earth. And that one also won the Campbell Award. But most of my books, I would say, starting with A Door into Ocean, are in the Elysium universe, which is also the Door into Ocean universe.
Is Minds in Transit part of that series?
Yes. So Minds in Transit is also there. And so in that universe, you have two planets. There's the planet Valadon and the planet Elysium. So Valadon is a planet that has a feudal monarchy trying to be modern, which is, again, this is thousands of years in the future. But the idea is, what would something like Saudi Arabia or Qatar look like 1,000 years from now? They still have monarchy, they still have dungeons, but they also have all the latest technology. And they're also trying to show they have a democracy, but when they get impatient, they just throw you in the dungeon. So that's Valadon. Then the other planet is Shora, which is the planet that was initially colonized by the all-female society. And so the sharers of Shora are still there in Minds in Transit. They're still there on Shora. But in addition, there's a more advanced civilization, a hyper-advanced, hyper-modern civilization that exists on floating cities on Shora. So on this hyper-modern civilization, they have a very advanced government. They have no hierarchy. They're all citizens of a republic. It's modeled after Plato's Republic. And so they think they're hyper advanced and treat everybody the same, but their government has advanced so far that it's beyond democracy. The only thing left is the law courts, because we all know that democracies eventually dissolve into endless legal battles.
Mm-hmm.
So this civilization of Elysium is based on legal battles. In order to do anything, you have to file a lawsuit. Like if you want to graduate from high school, you have to file a lawsuit arguing that you're adult now and you can't be trapped in high school anymore. Okay.
I
So,
love that.
so at the time that I conceived this idea, it sounded somewhat far out, but I think we've almost reached that point already where the only way change occurs is by the law courts,
Mm-hmm.
or in some cases, the parliamentarian. There's one scene with a parliamentarian in Minds in Transit, but I won't give away that scene. That's too good.
Often in your work, you highlight marginalized groups like tribal communities, people of color, and LGBTQ communities. Why is inclusivity important in your storytelling?
Why is inclusivity important? I think I would turn that inside out and say, what could be more important? There are two approaches to that. I will say that when I first started out writing science fiction, I didn't think about this very much. I thought about inclusivity in analytical terms as a scientist. I was a junior in college. I read a study that showed a certain percentage of people in all societies were gay. Now, this was back in the 70s, you understand.
Mhm.
This is very, very basic. And so I looked and I thought, well, if that's true, then if I write a novel, there has to be somebody gay in it. It wouldn't be realistic if there were no gay people in it. So I had one minor character that was gay. Now, again, this was in the late 70s. When the book came out, the only people I heard from besides Quakers, this was a book about a Quaker planet, but besides Quakers, the only people I heard from were gay people. People came out to me and said, "Oh, I'm gay. You have one gay character in your book." And it just never occurred to me that that was a thing. In fact, they even put my book in gay bookstores because it had one gay character in it. So that was really an eye-opening thing for me. And it was after that I thought, well, if I write books about gay people, then my books will always stay in print in gay bookstores. So that was one reason why in my next book it was an all-female society and there was gender fluidity in that. And that was a big thing about that book. So after that, I sort of had consciousness raised and then thought, well, actually, if you really want to get realistic, people of color are the majority everywhere. And that actually the way the world is. So since then, all of my books have featured characters of color, not just one, but the protagonist and the majority of my characters are people of color. And it was then another eye-opening experience that the cover of my books never had a person of color on it. In fact, there have been two editions of A Door into Ocean that showed a person on the cover. The first edition did not show people, okay? And I was told by the publisher, well, we just don't do that. We don't think that's a good idea. I was kind of naive back then. But there were two later editions, but in both cases, they showed the sharer in white trance. Okay, now right? And so I thought, well, but these people are purple. Why do they show them in white trance instead of the way they look most of the time?
Yeah.
And this happened time after time that I would not see a person of color in my book. And then I got to know Octavia Butler. I loved Octavia Butler and I wrote about her books. But I noticed that her books before the MacArthur Award, they always had a 50s looking white people on the cover.
Mm-hmm.
And after she got the MacArthur Award, then she finally had a person of color on her cover because she insisted on it. So that was a big
Yeah.
thing. So finally, for Minds in Transit, actually, I turned down so-called major publishers and I went with Arc Manor, Kasich Press, which is an outstanding up-and-coming smaller press. They do mainly well-known authors, but they do a very custom job working very closely with authors. So for the first time, I had an accurate cover on Minds in Transit that shows what the protagonist looks like.
And I love the cover of Minds in Transit. It's so colorful, and it's something that if it was laying on a table in a bookstore, I would pick that book up. They did a fantastic job of it.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you appreciate that. And that's really to the credit of Shahid Mahmood and the artist he worked with to do that. They really do a great job.
Now seems like a good time to do our 5 quick questions that never turn out to be quick, but I am just a very nosy person and I will always want to ask them. Are you ready?
Yes.
Question 1. What hobby or pastime outside of writing recharges you the most?
The Resistance. Absolutely. So after the first election shock back in 2016, the very next day, I was out there with my friends. We have a public square in Mount Vernon, and we were out there protesting. And I'd learned to do this from the Quakers and from back when I was at Yale, the Peace and Justice Center run by Paul Hodel in New Haven. We had a weekly vigil in front of the post office with holding signs about nuclear war. So we started doing this. And ever since then, we have kept this up in Mount Vernon, even after it looked like things were getting better every Saturday. And that's a real recharge for me because I get to meet other people that are concerned about fighting for justice. And for a while, we were only getting like 8 people. There'd be 2 for each side of the square. But now we're getting as many as 500 that come out.
Oh, wow.
So this is tremendously energizing. And I would say that's the most energizing thing for me.
Question 2. Do you have a favorite animal or pet, and has it ever inspired a character for you?
Well, my son had a cat when he was growing up here. And also, for a while, he had a chinchilla because there were some very friendly, non invasive experiments that were done in the psychology department, completely non harmful to the animals. And he did a project on that. And I was impressed by the chinchillas. Chinchillas are like a cross between a hamster and a cat. They
Hmm.
behave like a cat, but their ecology is more like a hamster. So I did find it really interesting watching animals and cats. And Minds in Transit actually has a cat as a character. The protagonist has cats, and she has what's called a Savannah cat, which is a cross between a Savannah wildcat and a house cat. And it's partly for companion, partly as protector. And it turns out to be an important character. One of my big interests now is AI. And everybody talks about, well, what if there's human level AI? And how would we treat that? Would it have rights? In fact, at the Seattle WordCon, I'm going to do a sideshow panel series where we're going to present a sentient claiming AI that was created by a colleague of mine, and that'll be featured. So in Minds in Transit, there are various kinds of AI that are sentient. But one of the things people never think about is what about in between? Okay, so let's say you have an AI that we decide is intelligent and deserves human rights. But what if we have another AI that's just as smart as a cat, right? Or as smart as a mouse? What kind of rights would that have? So that's something I've been thinking about. And in my next book that I'm working on now, there will be more discussion of that. So I'm interested in animals that are pets and their relationship with humans, but also it makes me wonder what would an AI relationship have with a human? Someday, my ambition is to own a robot dog because I
Yeah.
know that there are robot dogs that are really good right now in Japan and in China. China has the best, the go-to. And I thought of getting that one, but now they're using it to fight in Ukraine, and I don't want a military object.
Hmm.
But there are robot dogs that can play with other dogs and be life. So I wonder about that. Will we have AI pets in the future?
Oh, I have no doubt that that'll happen someday. Probably not in my lifetime, but in the future, I would not be surprised at all. Question 3. Is there a motto or a quote that you live by?
There are so many of them.
I know for me, whenever I was going through all my brain surgeries, there was a quote by Winston Churchill: when you're going through hell, keep going. That became very poignant to my life.
I think it would be Mother Jones. Pray for the dead and fight like hell for the living.
Oh, I like that.
I think that that kind of energy is really what keeps me writing and keeps me getting up every day. I'm very, very acutely aware of how other people live. And I guess part of being a novelist is that I can't just ignore other people around me because every person around me might be something that would fit in a novel someday. And so I notice things. I think about right now when some people are so concerned, they want to know, why don't women have more children? And these are the same people that are taking away Medicaid and the Department of Education. And it's just the kind of thing that I feel strongly about. And so Mother Jones is definitely the inspiration for me.
Question 4. What is one pet peeve you have?
Oh, there are so many. I want to think of something that won't embarrass anyone at Kenyon.
I know for me, one that just absolutely, it's like nails on a chalkboard is whenever I hear people either say or they will write that when it should be who.
Oh, well, my husband teaches Greek and Latin, and between the two of us, we have too many to count. TNTC of that, like based off. I hate that. It's based on. It doesn't make sense to say based off. What does that mean? Based on, you have a base on something. I can't stand based off, and I cross that out of my student papers. I think my biggest pet peeve would be when I get an email from a student saying, I'm sorry I had to miss class today. Did I miss anything? Right.
So it's like, no, we did nothing because you weren't there.
Exactly. But definitely based on, if you can just put in your podcast, tell everybody it's based on. There must be things like that in German. Are there pet peeves like that in German? I spent a year in Switzerland in the Zurich area. So I did speak Swiss German once upon a time. But I would guess that there are things like that.
I really wouldn't know. My German is not that great. And whenever I tell people, it's like, I'm sorry, mein Deutsch ist Mist, which is my German is poop. They don't ever correct me like, no, no, you speak great. You speak fine. I understood you. It's all okay. So if there are little things that I say that would be like a pet peeve for people about proper grammar, they don't ever tell me. So now for question 5, I've been asking everyone the same question because I am compiling a list of book recommendations from our authors to put in our year-end book buying guide in November. So for question 5, when someone asks you for a book recommendation, who is the first author you go to?
I think that depends on the person and whether they've ever read science fiction before. This would be nonfiction.
Anything.
Well, a year ago would have been Martha Wells' Murderbot, but of course, now that's an Apple series this year. Who would have thought? So now that would be too easy. I like Cy Clark's Teapot series for people who are just interested in really cheerful, cozy adventure story that has some really interesting thoughts behind it. I recommend Cy Clark.
Have you ever read anything by Tanith Lee?
Oh, yes, of course, Tanith Lee. So Tanith Lee, the Don't Bite the Sun,
Mm-hmm.
back in the day, that was my favorite book. I really loved that.
Even today, her book, Silver Medal Lover, is still my favorite book. I cannot even tell you how many times I've read that thing. So now, what is next for you?
Yes, so I'm working on another book in the Elysium universe, but on a different planet, a planet that's just mentioned briefly in Minds in Transit as a sort of far out planet. The planet is called Solaria, and it's far out in the solar system. It was borderline to terraform, and so it was terraformed very badly. And there have been lawsuits ever since for the past 100 years about how badly terraformed it is. Because, first of all, there wasn't enough light for photosynthesis, so they had to add mirror moons to bump up the light. And then it was supposed to be a habitable continent, but it turned into a wetland And it's kind of a redwood wetland with cypress-like plants that grow into tall trees, but the wetland is full of invertebrate monsters that chew up anybody that falls in it. So the humans have to live in the top of the trees. And meanwhile, there are weed trees that got in. There are all kinds of weed species from the other planets that got in by mistake. So it's just a total mess. And it's about the people that have to live in these tree houses. And in the meantime, because it's a far out planet, it's seen as a refuge for fugitives from other planets. So in particular, the sentients from minds in transit, some of them, they were enslaved as machines by the evil corporation. And so they escape from there and crash land in this wetland. And so it's just a whole lot of interesting stuff.
Do you have any idea of a publication date for that or just year?
No, I'm still working on that. It's really hard for me to know about that. And I have the luxury that I don't have a deadline
Hmm.
because I earn plenty on my textbooks, but it definitely will be in the next couple of years.
Let's remind everybody again who you are and what you write.
I am Joan Slonczewski, and I teach microbiology and conduct research at Kenyon College. But I'm transitioning into full time writing. I write science fiction novels about bizarre ecosystems and fighting for justice in that context. Also, I write about intelligent AI and microbial aliens.
And where can they find you and your work?
My books are everywhere. My books are on Amazon, but I'm boycotting Amazon myself right now. So I recommend Barnes and Noble and Thrift Books, and all the online booksellers have my books.
Do you have a website?
I have my research and writing website, Joan Slonczewski at Kenyon.
And of course, as always, we're going to have all of your information in the description of today's podcast and as well on our website at burkhartbooks.com/podcast with live links so that everyone can just click and go and find you and all of your information and buy your books. Thank you so much for being here with me today. This has been so fun. You are just really fascinating, and your research that you're doing is just amazing.
Well, thanks so much, Diane. It's really been a pleasure talking with you. And I hope I'll see you at the Frankfurt event next year.
I hope so. That'll be fun. So there you have it, folks. My incredible interview with the amazing Joan Slonczewski. Not only do I recommend that you go check out all of her books, you should go to her website that we have listed in the description of today's podcast and check out the articles that she has posted about the discoveries that they have been making in Antarctica. The stuff that they're discovering there is so fascinating, and it is not scientific papers that she has up there. It is something that anyone of any scientific knowledge will be able to understand what is going on. And it is really some fascinating stuff. So be sure to go check it all out. Now, next week, we're going to be talking with Derek Jackson about his novel Shadow One, based on a true story. Derek Jackson started out his career in the Air Force serving as a jet engine specialist until he was recruited to become a special agent with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. He has conducted both criminal investigations and counterintelligence. He joined OSI's Special Missions Branch to support Air Force Special Operations Command missions worldwide. After 21 years of service, Derek retired from the Air Force and became an author. Once you know his personal history, Shadow One's story makes a lot of sense. It follows Devin Jackson, an Air Force special agent, who faces a pivotal decision between the love of his life and a career opportunity with the OSI. Shadow One is a mesmerizing tale that weaves together suspense, criminal investigation, and romance. So be sure to check back with us next week and hear all about this fascinating story from the man himself. Now, if you're following along with Burckhardt Books and Book Banter Productions news, we actually have a sponsor now. Well, we actually have two. Of course, I always have what I consider to be my platinum sponsor, my husband, Pedro Burckhardt, who is not only a great financial support for us, but he is also our CTO and IT reporter for Book Banter Productions. But besides my husband, we now have another sponsor. You've already heard from her before in episode 180 when we discussed her book, A Bend in the Breeze. And of course, I'm talking about the incredible Valerie Sherrard. She has become a star-level sponsor for us, and we cannot say thank you enough. If you would like to be a sponsor of Book Banter Productions, you can go to our Buy Me a Coffee page. There is a link in the description of today's podcast, and there are some great perks that come along with being a sponsor. And as we move forward on some of our other projects that we have in plans for Book Banter Productions, I'm sure we'll be adding a few extra perks that aren't mentioned on there as they become available. If you're following along with my little broken leg saga, I did go to the doctor last week, and I am still mostly on bed rest for another 3 weeks, and then we'll do a reassessment. I am actually kind of on a work release program right now. I am allowed to get out of bed and go into my studio, which is a wonderful thing because the sound quality is so much better in there. But for the most part, I'm still on bed rest. But the good thing is I am getting a lot of stuff done being stuck in bed. Since I don't have to do laundry, shopping, cooking, cleaning, I have a lot of free time. I've been able to finally write my business plan. I've been creating all kind of things behind the scenes that we're hoping to implement at the end of this year and some of the things for the beginning of next year. I've been working on 2 books simultaneously, so it's not all bad. But I still am dying to get up and around because it is incredibly frustrating not being able to walk at the moment. But it is what it is, and I prefer to try and look at the bright side of things. And speaking of that, you all know what time it is. It's time for you all to go forth and be really happy. We've got a lot of great things coming up for you soon.